Hello, party people, and welcome to another episode of Office Hours, where I answer your questions about the SQL Server, Azure SQL DB, the Microsoft Data Platform. This is back to our first regular working week, January 8th, and so we have the first regular full week here in the office. So I'm going to do, of course, what I would want to do is distract myself from work for a minute in the guise of answering your questions. So let's go take a look at what your top voted question is. Let's see here. Mattia asks, has bulk logged recovery model ever gotten you across the finish line? If so, can you share a story? Okay, so for me, no, but I have heard from other people who do ETL data warehousing type work that they were able to shave time off of their nightly loads, in particular the restore or the backups that needed to happen during and after their nightly loads. I have never been in that position myself. For me, every time that I've had a database, even while it was undergoing loads, people have said, we want point-in-time recovery because there are other things happening inside the database. We want to be able to jump exactly back to one particular point in time. So for me, I've never been able to use it. It's not to say that it's bad. It just hasn't gotten me across the finish line. Hello, Renegade Larson. Next up, we have ForEachDBA, who says, my manager wants to reduce CPU as their CPU usage is less than 50% most of the time. Okay, let's reword that a little bit. The manager wants to downsize the SQL servers. He says, the question is, how do I measure effectively the impact of reducing CPU? Really simple, query runtime. Is query runtime still good enough for your end users? And you're going to laugh, but what I'll tell most companies, because I've had clients in this exact same position, what I've said is go cut CPU by half and see if people complain. Because often when people are trying to cut costs like this, they also don't have a whole bunch of proactive monitoring. They don't have detailed metrics about, say, the plan cache. They don't have P95 query durations or anything like that. I'm just cut CPU in half every week until complaints start and then pop it up by 1/2. Now, if you want to dig more deeply into that, you can use look at which queries are using the most CPU, but that's the fastest, easiest way to do it. Let's see. Next up, Ataollah says, will we see any new features added to the SQL Server 2022 in 2024? Well, given that the product is 2 years past its release date, I don't think that Microsoft would go back and add features to it. Hey, good news, folks. Your 2022 Toyota Corolla just got some brand new features. Go to the store today and we'll add in heated seats for you for free. Right? Like, that doesn't seem to happen too often. It's conceivably possible, but fairly unlikely because they want you to buy something new. Azure. Henrique says, as a recommendation, Microsoft suggests that we use the maximum for MAXDOP being 8. We changed it to 2. Hold on a second here. Oh, SQL Dev DBA, thanks for the renewal. But Henrique, you're saying that Microsoft told you to set something to one number and you set it to another. Why? I just wonder why. It says, given your opinion on the relationship between MAXDOP and CXPACKET, are they proportional or inversely proportional? Go to brentozar.com/go/CXPACKET, and I have tons of information on there. brentozar.com/go/CXPACKET. So shout out there to SQL Dev DBA for 27 months of subscription on a 23-month streak. That's fantastic. Let's see here. Serge Chandwich says, good morning, Brent. Happy to catch another stream. Also scream. Happy to have you as well. Need to change glasses here so I can see that particular monitor over there. Next up, Bonnie says, is it okay or safe to simultaneously run SPBlitz cache and SPBlitz index on a busy boxed SQL server? Sometimes one of those takes a long time to complete. So here's the deal. When you say, is it safe to do something? I don't know how your SQL server is configured. I don't know if you're running SQL Server on a phone. I don't know if you're running SQL Server on some wildly underpowered piece of hardware that's already screaming at the seams. It's bad for me to say, is it safe to do something when I've never seen your server, right? So what I would say is if you want to run more load, because that's what you're trying to do here. You're trying to add more queries to a server. If you're trying to add more load, start by doing it after hours or on the weekends so that you feel comfortable, and then you can go from there. Surly Dev, I like what you said there in the comments. Next up, we have, let's see here. Owl Kitty says, what is the danger zone for batch requests per second that we should be on the lookout for? I cover that in my Mastering Server Tuning class in the very first module. In Mastering Server Tuning, I explain the most important metrics to watch out for on your SQL Server, what the danger zones are, and what you can expect to find when you hit those danger zones. So that's a very useful class. TimelyDBA says, I've got a friend configuring alerts based on severity in a shop that uses internet security standards which recommend never using SQL Server for mail services. Have you heard alternative pathways to harmonize security? Yes. It's called monitoring software. And I bet that you can guess what monitoring software does. It monitors. That is what monitoring software does. Check out monitoring software. Next up, Nazanin says, what are the most common issues you see when applications connect to SQL Server over a WAN connection versus a LAN connection? Does compression help here? Obviously, the big problem there is latency. Getting a connection, the further you take the database server away from the applications, the longer it's going to take in order to respond. Does compression help? Not at all. SQL Server's compression is all about what's happening inside SQL Server's memory. It is nothing to do with sending results out the door. That has nothing to do with SQL Server's compression settings. MyTeaGotCold asks a really hard question. How can I quality assure SQL code? He says, other languages have reasonable error handling, good linters, and unit testing that doesn't need to be hacked in. MyTeaGotCold, if you can figure out how to do that, you should bottle it and sell it. Because that's what several companies try to do, actually. They try to build things like continuous integration, continuous deployment, unit testing, etc. Someone in the comments is inevitably going to say T-SQL-T, which is a way of unit testing T-SQL, but like you say, it really needs to be hacked in. It is not easy and efficient the way it is to do unit testing in development languages. So unfortunately, I just don't have a good answer for you there. And I don't think that it's exclusive to the Microsoft platform. I think that that's a problem that's pervasive throughout databases. And if you search for how to unit test databases, there's all kinds of posts and people tearing their hair out trying to figure out how to accomplish that. Bruno says, what is your opinion of the new Azure Boost feature? I have never even heard of it. I have no clue what it does. My guess is that you'll probably have to benchmark that for yourself. Next up, Bahareh asks, is column store index maintenance for large tables hard on recovery point objectives for when log shipping is involved? That's a great question, and it shows that you understand what's happening during index maintenance. So many people that I work with, database professionals that I work with, don't understand how the more you do index maintenance, the more it is you're making things like log shipping harder, always on availability groups harder, differential backups, transaction log backups, etc. So the fact that you're asking the question means that you understand, yes, it is hard on recovery point objectives. Rudy says the SQL Assessment API is complaining about high page splits. How do we identify which tables are experiencing this? What you have to do is you have to, if if you believe that this is a problem. What you have to do is you have to set up extended event sessions that track page splits on a per object basis, and then you have to go out and bucketize those to figure out which object IDs it is that are having the problems. You have to keep in mind that as you insert new rows onto new pages, those are also considered page splits by the SQL Assessment API. So in my opinion, that API is just kind of garbage. I've never seen a good positive outcome come out of that. But if you wanted to find out the root cause, that's what you have to do. TimelyDBA asks another really good question too. Says, who is the Brent Ozar for SQL Server always on availability groups and other high availability and disaster recovery strategies? In order to answer it, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. When SQL Server 2012 came out and always on availability groups came out, lots of us were out there cheerleading it. It's an amazing technology. I was like, it's like Diet Coke and Mentos. It's fantastic. It was around about the same time too. So there were so many of us who were blogging about it, doing training classes on it, and Microsoft kept investing in it every single version. They added new capabilities. To the product, but they didn't document them well, and they didn't make troubleshooting easy, and they didn't invest anything in the GUI. So if you wanted to figure out when it broke, why it was broken, it was a giant pain in the rear. By the time that they announced that they were going to do availability groups inside of Kubernetes on Linux, I was like, you know what? I'm out. I really don't want anything to do with this. Good luck. I will leave that to the next person. And as far as I know, like almost everybody else that I know who was working with availability groups had the same approach when it came to teaching. It's not the availability groups are suddenly bad. It's still a phenomenal technology. But the troubleshooting's like non-existent. The documentation is terrible. There's no troubleshooting like triage, checklist, anything like that. So I know a couple of people who were doing it years ago. Alan Hurt, Edwin Sarmiento, and Klaus Aschenbrenner. They were teaching classes on it. They were like the last to teach classes on it. But in terms of like being the Brent Ozar, usually when someone says, who's the Brent Ozar on this, that means that they blog about it, they do webcasts on it, they give you scripts about it, and they teach training classes. No one's doing that. Kind of sucks. Jen says, what are the best and worst use cases that you've seen for SP invoke external REST endpoint inside of SQL Server? Well, it's not in SQL Server. It's in Azure SQL DB, but not in the boxed product of SQL Server. So until it gets there, it's kind of hard to answer that question. And it's always kind of funny when Microsoft says things like, oh, Azure SQL DB, it's the next version of SQL Server. Well, there's some features that are in SQL Server and they're not in Azure SQL DB and vice versa. They're really kind of two separate products at this point. So I don't know if that stored procedure is ever going to make it into SQL Server box product. It's 2024. It's been about 2 years since the last time we heard anything about a release on SQL Server. I haven't heard anything recently. So kind of there you go. Next up, Bonnie says, SP Blitz First is reporting a priority 40 finding for forwarded fetches are high. When is this bad or concerning? What you want to do is go to the URL column of the output, copy paste that into your browser, and read the instructions there. Next up, let's see here. UnInstallAllScripts says, how do installation scripts get updated? Well, whoever maintains the software repository usually uses an automated tool to rebuild those scripts. And if you read the documentation, I know that word has a lot of syllables in it. So sometimes it's scary when adults use terms that have a whole lot of syllables. I got faith in you, though. I think 2024 is going to be the year where you read and I'm going to go slow and sound it out for you, documentation. I know that documentation sounds like a villain, like Doc Ock in Spider-Man, but this is different. He's actually your friend. Read the documentation. Thanks there, BD the DBA, for subscribing for 3 months straight. Woo-hoo-hoo. Next up, we have Manimal, who says, does it ever make sense to run Box SQL Server on a 24-core or less cloud VM? Do you see this much in the wild? All the time. Totally. Absolutely. Because sometimes people have specific features that they want to use that are only available in Enterprise. For the longest time, it was encryption type stuff. These days, it tends to be more like always-on availability groups with multiple read replicas, those things that you can't do in standard. Next up, Persephone asks, which vendors do you foresee doing cool AI integrations with SQL Server, or what integrations are you looking forward to? I am a big believer that you shouldn't put anything expensive inside the database server. Like, you shouldn't do anything that adds additional business logic inside the database server. Go do that in the application tier instead, where your licensing is way cheaper. I don't want more work happening inside of the database server. Now, of course, Microsoft, who wants to sell you more CPU licensing, is all about putting more stuff inside the database server. One of the things that you saw when they tried to trot out machine learning services was even they figured out that it was a bad idea, and they walked back that into a separate installation application, separate downloadable kind of thing, because it was just a bad idea to try to cram that much inside the database server, and troubleshooting is absolutely terrible. Tom in Yorks, thanks for subscribing for 3 months with Amazon Prime. Those of you who don't know too, if you have Amazon Prime, you can get one free Twitch subscription per month. So you can just log in with Amazon Prime and then use your subscription. Then you don't have to see any ads, because who likes ads? I certainly don't like ads. Rom says, what are the top customer issues you see when resizing a SQL VM up or down? Time. Just takes time. I've seen issues where people try to jump from one family to another that isn't supported, and it ends up taking them too long, or somebody breaks something in the middle of a wizard. So for me, if uptime is critical, just go stand up another SQL server, put it in part of an availability group or log shipping over to it, and then fail over to it so you can be down for only a matter of seconds, regardless of how long the resizing takes. Next up, Dom says, hi, Brent, have you ever thought of offering your training or blog in French? No, not French, not Spanish, anything else like that, because I tend to update the classes, and if I had to pay for them to be updated in every language, it would cost me a fortune. So, no. And then we'll do one more. Pytzamarama asks, happy 2024. Brent, I'll rephrase a badly asked question of mine. When we update our customers, we drop and recreate all stored procedures and triggers. Does this affect performance, and how? Pytzamarama, the way you asked the question isn't the problem. It's the fact that you're doing it. That's the problem. Don't do that. And I'll give you the simplest example, permissions. When you drop and recreate an object, you lose any custom permissions that the client has gone through and set up. Don't do that. Leave it in place. Only alter the stuff that needs to be changed. Please don't ask me that question again. The way you're asking the question is the least of your problems. There we go. So, there we go. We've been answering questions for about 15 minutes there. We'll stop, and now I'll go on. B. Squidwards, thanks for the 6 months worth of subscriptions there. Yeah, there we go. There goes our 15 minutes worth of questions there. Oh, we only had one question left. Oh, it's only one question left, so I'll go ahead and hit that in as well, because I thought this was kind of an interesting question. Zappy says, hi, Brent. As far as I know, a statistic update shouldn't cause a plan recompilation if a table wasn't modified. That's not true. You can absolutely have read-only tables that when you redo the statistics, it will cause the recompilations. And I demo that in my How to Think Like the Engine class. Go watch my totally free How to Think Like the Engine class on YouTube, and you'll see me go do DBCC update statistics. I'll do alter table update statistics. I'll do re-indexing, things like that. So it absolutely does happen. Surly Dev says, Brent, I just tweeted you a clip. I actually don't use Twitter anymore. I don't use that anymore because of Elon's stance on the way that he treats people. The trans community is a big one for me personally. My partner is non-binary, and so when he started bringing people back into Twitter who had been very abusive towards the trans community, and his attitude towards pronouns, for example, his own child, he won't honor their own pronouns. I'm like, I refuse to put any money into that guy's pockets, so I don't use his platform. All right. Well, thanks a lot for hanging out with me, and I will see y'all on the next office hours. Adios, y'all.